The small town of Pine Grove woke up to a light dusting of snow on a crisp February morning. The kind of morning where you could see your breath dance in front of your face and the sunshine sparkled off the fresh snow like tiny diamonds. Most of the residents on Maple Street were already familiar with one another. Families who had shared countless barbecues, borrowed cups of sugar, and watched each other's children grow up over the years. Which is why the moving truck, parked outside number 37, caught everyone's attention. The house had sat empty for nearly 8 months after old Mr. Reynolds passed away. It wasn't anything special. A modest 2-bedroom home with fading blue paint and a slightly crooked mailbox. But what made the property unique was the large wooden shed that sat at the far end of the backyard, almost hidden by overgrown bushes and a massive oak tree. "Looks like we finally have a new neighbor," Tom Wilson said to his wife as they sipped their morning coffee by the window, watching a slender woman direct the movers. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. "I hope she's friendly," replied Linda, wrapping her robe tighter against the morning chill. "We could use some new faces around here." Within days, the neighborhood grapevine was buzzing with information about Eleanor Matthews. She was polite but quiet when neighbors dropped by with welcome baskets and homemade casseroles. She answered questions with brief responses and rarely asked any in return. She lived alone, had moved from up north somewhere, and worked from home, though no one could figure out exactly what she did. What everyone did notice, however, was her unusual daily routine. Every morning, Eleanor would emerge from her house around 9 a.m., carrying a travel mug of what smelled like strong black coffee. But instead of heading to a car or walking toward town, she would make her way straight to the old shed. She'd unlock the heavy padlock she'd installed, slip inside, and remain there for hours. "Maybe she's a writer," suggested Doris from across the street, who fancied herself the neighborhood's unofficial welcoming committee. "They can be a bit odd, you know. Need their space to create." "Writers don't need sheds," countered her husband Frank with a dismissive wave. "They need computers and quiet. That old thing probably doesn't even have electricity, but it did." Tom noticed the electrician's van parked outside Eleanor's house during her second week in town. The following day, a heating specialist arrived, and the day after that, a local handyman spent almost 6 hours working on the shed. "Whatever she's doing in there, she's serious about it," Tom told Linda one evening as they walked their golden retriever past Eleanor's house. The lights were on in the shed, warm yellow squares glowing in the winter darkness. They could see Eleanor's shadow moving back and forth inside. By the time March arrived, Eleanor's trips to the shed had become as much a part of the neighborhood's rhythm as the mail delivery or school buses. She'd arrive in the morning, break briefly for lunch, and often wouldn't leave until well after dark. On weekends, sometimes she'd stay from sunrise until the stars came out. The children in the neighborhood were the first to start whispering. They'd ride their bikes past Eleanor's house, slowing down to peer through the trees at the mysterious shed. "My brother thinks she's building a spaceship in there," 10-year-old Joey told his friends as they huddled at the bus stop one morning. "He says she might be an alien." "That's stupid," replied his classmate Beth, rolling her eyes. "My mom says she's probably just hiding from something. Like maybe she has money problems or a bad ex-husband." The truth was, nobody really knew, and Eleanor didn't seem interested in clearing up the mystery. When spring arrived, turning Pine Grove into a riot of blooming flowers and budding trees, most residents were spending more time outside, gardening, walking, or simply enjoying the sunshine from their porches. Conversations naturally flowed between yards, and invitations to backyard gatherings were exchanged. Eleanor received these invitations with a polite smile and a vague, "perhaps another time." She never extended any invitations of her own. The shed remained her focus. If anything, her hours there seemed to increase with the warmer weather. Sometimes neighbors would hear faint noises coming from inside. Not anything alarming, just the occasional bump or scrape. Sometimes what sounded like furniture being moved. "Maybe she's one of those hoarders," whispered Diane from 2 doors down during the neighborhood's annual Easter egg hunt. You know, the kind you see on those reality TV shows. The shed could be full to the ceiling with newspapers and cat food cans. "She doesn't strike me as the hoarding type," replied Tom's wife Linda, who had exchanged pleasantries with Eleanor at the local grocery store. "Her house looks neat as a pin from what I can see through the windows, and I've never seen a single cat." "Well, something's not right," insisted Diane. "Normal people don't spend every waking hour in a shed." As spring turned to summer, the curiosity around Eleanor and her shed began to shift into something less friendly. Parents started telling their children to stay away from her property. Invitations stopped coming. Waves and greetings became less frequent, replaced with curious glances and whispered conversations. "Did you see her yesterday? Carried 3 large bags into that shed. Wouldn't even make eye contact when I said good morning," reported Frank to a group of neighbors gathered for a Saturday afternoon barbecue. "I drove by last night around midnight," added another neighbor named Joe. "Lights still on in that shed. What could anyone possibly be doing in there at that hour?" The theories grew wilder with each retelling. Eleanor was hiding from the law. She was conducting strange experiments. She was part of a cult. She was building bombs. She was mentally ill. None of these neighbors had actually spoken to Eleanor beyond brief hellos in months. One particularly hot July afternoon, Tom was watering his front garden when he noticed Eleanor struggling with several large, flat packages she was trying to carry from her car to the shed. Without thinking, he set down his hose and walked over. "Need a hand with those?" he called out. Eleanor looked up, startled. For a moment, Tom thought she might refuse. Her eyes darted toward the shed protectively. That would be very kind," she finally said, her voice softer than he expected. "They're heavier than I anticipated." Tom helped her carry the packages, which were indeed surprisingly heavy, across the yard to the shed door. Eleanor quickly unlocked the padlock and positioned herself in the doorway in a way that blocked his view inside. "I can take them from here," she said firmly, reaching for the packages. "Are you sure?" "I don't mind, I'm sure." Her tone was polite but final. "Thank you for your help." As Tom turned to leave, he caught the briefest glimpse past Eleanor's shoulder into the shed. He couldn't make out details in the dim light, but the space looked surprisingly organized. "And was that the smell of paint?" "You know," he said hesitantly. "Some of the neighbors have been wondering what you're working on in there." Eleanor's expression closed off immediately. "I value my privacy," she said simply. Of course, Tom backpedaled, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to pry." "It's nothing interesting anyway," Eleanor added, her voice softening slightly. "Just a personal project. A hobby, really." That evening, Tom shared his brief conversation with Linda. "A hobby?" Linda repeated thoughtfully. "What kind of hobby requires someone to spend 12 hours a day in a shed?" Tom shrugged. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's her business. Maybe we should all just leave her alone." But small towns rarely leave mysteries unsolved, and as summer blazed on, the woman in the shed became Pine Grove's favorite puzzle to solve. Children dared each other to peek through the shed windows, though none ever actually did. Adults created elaborate stories to explain Eleanor's behavior, and Eleanor herself continued her daily routine, seemingly oblivious to the whispers that followed her through town, or perhaps simply choosing to ignore them. Each morning she would walk to the shed with purpose in her step. Each evening, she would return to her house looking tired but somehow satisfied. The mystery of what exactly Eleanor Matthews was doing in that old shed would continue to fuel neighborhood gossip for weeks to come. None of them could have possibly guessed what they would eventually discover inside. By the time August rolled around, the mystery of Eleanor Matthews and her shed had evolved from simple curiosity to something more troubling. The initial friendly interest had soured into judgment and mockery, spreading through Pine Grove like a slow-moving virus. It started innocently enough at the town's annual summer festival. The event brought together nearly everyone in Pine Grove for a day of carnival games, local food, and live music in the park. Eleanor had been living in town for almost 6 months by then, but few people had managed more than a passing conversation with her. "Look who decided to join the land of the living," whispered Diane to a group of women as Eleanor walked past their picnic table. Eleanor wore a simple sundress and carried a small sketchbook, nodding politely to those who caught her eye but not stopping to chat. "Probably needed a break from whatever weird stuff she does in that shed," replied Nancy, another neighbor. "My husband thinks she might be running some kind of illegal business. Says there's no other explanation for someone spending that much time locked away." "Tax evasion," offered Doris with authority. "My cousin works for the IRS. Says people hiding money always have a secret place where they keep records." "Or maybe she's just plain crazy," added Nancy, not bothering to lower her voice as Eleanor passed within earshot. "Crazy shed lady," Eleanor's steps faltered slightly, her shoulders tensing, but she continued walking without acknowledging the comment. The women's laughter followed her across the park. That nickname, Crazy Shed Lady, caught on quickly among the adults of Pine Grove. And once the adults had embraced it, the children weren't far behind. The bus stop at the corner of Maple Street became a hotspot for shed theories as the new school year began in September. Joey, now sporting a new backpack and shoes for 5th grade, had appointed himself the neighborhood's official Eleanor expert. "My dad says she probably escaped from a mental hospital," he announced importantly to the gathered children one morning. "That's why she hides in the shed. She's afraid someone will recognize her and send her back. My mom told me not to walk past her house alone," added Beth, hugging her books to her chest. "She says we don't really know anything about her." "I heard she talks to herself," contributed another child. "Makes weird noises, too." A small boy named Peter, who had moved to the neighborhood just that summer, frowned. "But how do you know all that if nobody goes near her?" The older children exchanged glances. "We just know," Joey said dismissively. "Everyone knows." The truth was nobody really knew anything. But in the absence of facts, rumors flourished. Tom Wilson remained one of the few neighbors who hadn't completely written Eleanor off. His brief interaction with her months ago had left him with the nagging feeling that there was more to the story. One evening in early October, as the leaves were beginning to turn brilliant shades of orange and red, he noticed Eleanor struggling to unload several large bags of what looked like soil from her car. Linda caught him watching from their kitchen window. "You're thinking of helping her again, aren't you?" Tom shrugged. "Seems like the neighborly thing to do." "Last time you tried, she practically slammed the door in your face," Linda reminded him. "Maybe she was just having a bad day." Linda sighed. "Tom, I love your big heart, but that woman clearly doesn't want our help or our friendship." "Maybe she doesn't know how to ask for it," Tom replied, already heading for the door. This time, Eleanor's response to his offer of help was even more guarded than before. "No thank you," she said curtly, not pausing in her efforts to drag a heavy bag toward the shed. "I can manage." "Those bags look pretty heavy," Tom persisted. "It would only take a minute with 2 of us." I said no. Eleanor's voice was firm. She stopped and faced him directly. "I appreciate the thought, but I prefer to handle things myself." "Is it because of what people have been saying?" Tom asked before he could stop himself. "About you in the shed?" Eleanor's expression flickered with something, hurt perhaps, or resignation. "What people think is their business," she said finally. "What I do is mine." "For what it's worth," Tom offered, "not everyone believes the rumors." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "But you're curious too, aren't you? About what's in the shed?" Tom couldn't deny it. "Human nature, I guess." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Yes, it is." She hefted her bag again. "Good evening, Mr. Wilson." Tom watched her disappear into the shed, feeling as though he'd somehow failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. The following week brought the first meeting of the Pine Grove Homeowners Association after the summer break. The gathering in the community center's meeting room was better attended than usual, largely due to one agenda item that had been circulating in neighborhood emails. Discussion of property maintenance standards, 37 Maple Street. Eleanor wasn't present when Patricia Henderson, the association president, called the meeting to order. Patricia was a formidable woman who took the neighborhood's appearance very seriously and considered property values a personal responsibility. "Now, moving on to item 5, Patricia announced, shuffling her papers importantly. "We've received several complaints about the condition of the property at 37 Maple Street, specifically regarding the outbuilding in the rear yard." "It's an eyesore," called out Frank from the back of the room. "Brings down the whole street," Patricia nodded gravely. "Several members have expressed concern about the structure's appearance and unusual use." "It's not just about how it looks," added Diane. "It's about safety. Nobody knows what goes on in there. There could be chemicals, fire hazards. My kids have to walk past that house to get to the bus," Nancy chimed in. "It makes me nervous." Tom, who had been listening with growing discomfort, finally spoke up. "Hang on a minute. Are we really discussing someone's private property when they're not even here to defend themselves? Has anyone actually seen anything dangerous happening?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "The bylaws clearly state that outbuildings must be maintained in good condition and used for conventional purposes," Patricia said stiffly. storage, workshops, that sort of thing. And how do we know her shed isn't being used for those things? Tom challenged. Well, Patricia hesitated. The frequency and duration of use suggests what? Tom interrupted. That she has an unusual hobby? Since when is that against the rules? Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Patricia cleared her throat. Perhaps we should table this discussion until we can review the bylaws more thoroughly, and possibly invite Ms. Matthews to address concerns directly. As the meeting moved on to other topics, Tom noticed several neighbors giving him curious looks. Standing up for the neighborhood outcast wasn't winning him any popularity points. Linda squeezed his hand under the table. That took guts, she whispered. Someone had to say it, Tom muttered back. Later that week, a formal letter from the Homeowners Association was delivered to 37 Maple Street, requesting that Eleanor attend the next meeting to discuss concerns regarding property use. The next day, Eleanor spent even longer than usual in her shed, emerging only as darkness fell. As fall deepened, bringing shorter days and chilly nights, Eleanor's routine remained unchanged. If anything, the growing coldness of her neighbors seemed to drive her deeper into isolation. The only difference was that she now did her shopping one town over, where nobody knew her as the crazy shed lady. What nobody in Pine Grove realized was how much their whispers and stares were affecting her. Each morning, it took more courage for Eleanor to make the walk across her yard to the shed. Each time she passed neighbors who fell silent at the sight of her, a little piece of her resolve crumbled. But still, she persisted. Whatever was happening in that shed was important enough to endure the community's judgment, important enough to face the stares and whispers day after day. And as October gave way to November, bringing the first hints of winter to Pine Grove, the mystery of Eleanor Matthews and her shed remained unsolved, a splinter under the skin of the neighborhood that no one could quite forget or ignore. November brought the first real chill to Pine Grove, along with dark clouds that hung low in the sky for days at a time. Weather forecasters had been warning about a particularly harsh winter, but few residents were prepared for the ferocity of the storm that hit the week before Thanksgiving. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. The wind picked up first, bending the nearly bare trees and sending the last of autumn's leaves dancing down the streets. By evening, rain was falling in heavy sheets, drumming against rooftops and windows. Most of Pine Grove's residents hurried home early, stocking up on essentials from the local market, before battening down for what the news was calling the storm of the decade. Eleanor Matthews had been in her shed since morning. Tom Wilson noticed her hurrying across her yard around 7 that morning, clutching her usual travel mug and what looked like a large plastic tarp. As the day progressed and the storm warnings became more urgent, he found himself glancing repeatedly at number 37, wondering if Eleanor was aware of how bad the weather was expected to get. She's still out there, he told Linda as they prepared dinner, thunder rumbling in the distance. In that shed. I'm sure she has a radio or phone, Linda replied, though she joined him at the window with a concerned expression. She must know about the storm. Maybe I should go check, Tom suggested, but Linda shook her head. After how she's responded to your help before, she'd probably think you were just being nosy again. Tom sighed, knowing his wife was right. Still, as the evening progressed and the storm intensified, he couldn't shake his worry. By 9 o'clock, the power had gone out across most of the neighborhood. Tom and Linda sat in their living room, flashlights and candles providing small pools of light as they listened to the wind howl and the rain lash against the windows. I hope that shed of hers is sturdier than it looks, Linda murmured, pulling her sweater tighter around herself. Around 10:30, they heard it, a tremendous cracking sound, followed by a crash that seemed to shake the ground even through the roar of the storm. That was close, Tom said, moving to the window. In the beam of his flashlight, he could make out the massive shape of a fallen tree. Looks like the old oak went down. Linda joined him, peering through the curtain of rain. Oh no, she gasped. Tom, I think it fell on Eleanor's shed. Tom squinted through the darkness. The beam of his flashlight wasn't strong enough to see clearly across the yards, but something about the shape of the fallen tree made his stomach drop. I'm going to check, he said, already reaching for his raincoat. I'm coming too, Linda insisted, grabbing her own coat. Together they hurried out into the storm, the wind nearly knocking them off their feet as they made their way toward Eleanor's property. The rain was so heavy it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead, but as they got closer, Tom's flashlight confirmed their fears. The massive oak tree that had stood at the edge of Eleanor's yard for decades had finally surrendered to the storm, crashing directly onto the shed. "Eleanor!" Tom called out, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "Eleanor, are you in there?" For a heart-stopping moment, there was no response. Then, through the rain, they saw a beam of light moving toward them from the direction of Eleanor's house. "Hello?" Eleanor's voice carried faintly through the storm. She was huddled under the small overhang of her back door, a raincoat hastily thrown over her shoulders, her face pale in the glow of her flashlight. "Who's there?" "It's Tom and Linda Wilson from next door," Tom called back, moving closer. "We saw the tree come down. Are you all right?" Eleanor nodded, though her expression was tight with distress. "I was in the house when it happened. I heard the crash and—" Her voice trailed off as she stared past them at the damaged shed. "Is there anything in there that needs to be saved?" Linda asked gently. "Anything that might get ruined by the rain?" Eleanor's eyes widened with sudden panic. "My work," she whispered, then louder. "All my work is in there." Without another word, she pushed past them, splashing through puddles toward the shed. Tom and Linda exchanged a quick glance before following. As they got closer, they could see the extent of the damage. The massive tree trunk had crashed through one side of the roof, leaving a gaping hole. Rain was pouring in, and part of one wall had buckled under the weight. "It's not safe to go in there," Tom warned, catching up to Eleanor as she fumbled with the padlock on the door. "The whole structure could collapse." "I don't care," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. "I have to save them. I have to try." Something in her desperation struck Tom deeply. This wasn't about some strange hobby or secret project. This was about something that mattered profoundly to this woman, something worth risking her safety for. "Let me help," he said firmly. "The trees mainly hit the back corner. If we're careful, we can probably get in and out safely, but we need to be quick." Eleanor hesitated, her hand still on the lock. For the first time since they'd known her, she looked vulnerable, uncertain. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "No one's supposed to see." "Eleanor," Linda said, stepping forward, rain streaming down her face. "Whatever's in there, it doesn't matter to us, but it matters to you, and it's about to be destroyed. Let us help." A particularly strong gust of wind rocked what remained of the shed, and a fresh crack echoed through the night. The decision was made for them as part of the roof gave way with a splintering sound. "Hurry," Eleanor said, finally unlocking the door with shaking hands. The door swung open, and Tom directed his flashlight beam inside. What the light revealed made him freeze in the doorway, his mouth falling open in shock. "Oh my God," Linda breathed beside him. The interior of the shed looked nothing like the ramshackle exterior had suggested. The space had been transformed into an artist's studio, with every inch meticulously organized. Shelves lined the walls holding jars of brushes, tubes of paint, and other supplies. A large workbench ran along one side, cluttered with palette knives, mixing trays, and reference books. But it was what hung on the walls and stood on easels throughout the space that left Tom and Linda speechless. Paintings, dozens of them, filled the studio. Landscapes of Pine Grove in every season, street scenes capturing the town square during festivals, portraits of houses along Maple Street with such detail and warmth they seemed almost alive. And in the center of the room, on the largest easel, stood a canvas that was clearly a work in progress, a sweeping panorama of the entire neighborhood, with every house, every garden, every detail rendered with extraordinary care and beauty. "These are—" Tom couldn't find the words. "We need to save them," Eleanor said urgently, pushing past him into the studio. "The water's already coming in through the back, please." That broke the spell. Tom and Linda moved quickly, following Eleanor's instructions about which pieces to grab first. The wind continued to howl outside, and the shed groaned ominously around them as they carefully removed canvases from the walls and gathered smaller works into plastic bins that Eleanor pulled from under the workbench. "The big one," Eleanor said, pointing to the centerpiece on the easel. "That one matters most." Tom carefully lifted the large canvas, surprised by its weight. "Where are we taking everything?" "My living room," Eleanor replied, gathering up brushes and paints. "It's not ideal, but it's dry." They worked with frantic energy, making trip after trip between the shed and the house, ignoring the rain that soaked them to the skin. With each journey, Tom and Linda saw more of Eleanor's incredible work. Detailed studies of local landmarks, small sketches of children playing in the park, even a series of paintings capturing the changing light over Pine Grove Lake throughout the day. On their fourth trip back to the shed, a loud splintering sound made them all freeze. "That's it," Tom said firmly. "We've saved what we could. No more trips. It's not worth risking our lives." Eleanor looked ready to argue, her eyes darting to the remaining canvases still on the back wall, but another crack from above settled the matter. The three of them hurried out just as a large section of the roof collapsed inward, sending up a spray of water and debris. Standing in the rain, watching as the shed that had been the center of so much speculation began to fall in on itself, Eleanor suddenly looked very small and tired. 3 years of work, she whispered. "Some of it's gone forever now." "But not all of it," Linda reminded her gently. "We saved the most important pieces." As they turned toward the house carrying the last of the rescued artwork, Tom couldn't help but ask the question that had been on everyone's mind for months. "Eleanor, why did you keep all this a secret? These paintings, they're incredible." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She led them into her living room, where dozens of canvases now leaned against the walls and furniture. In the warm glow of the emergency lantern she'd set up, the artwork looked even more impressive. "It's a long story," she finally said, looking around at her displaced work. "And one I suppose I'll have to tell now." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside Eleanor's previously private world, a different kind of barrier had finally begun to break down. The storm raged on through the night, but inside Eleanor's small living room, a different kind of tension hung in the air. Tom and Linda stood awkwardly among the rescued paintings, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor. Eleanor disappeared briefly into the hallway, returning with armfuls of towels. "You're both soaked," she said, handing them each a towel. "I've put the kettle on the gas stove. The power might be out, but at least we can have tea." Tom rubbed his hair with the towel, his eyes never leaving the artwork propped against every available surface. Now in the steady glow of the lanterns, he could truly appreciate what they had saved. The paintings weren't just good, they were extraordinary. Each one captured not just the physical details of Pine Grove, but somehow the essence of the place, the feeling of the town and its people. "I still don't understand," Linda said softly, carefully stepping around a stack of smaller canvases. "Why hide all this? Why keep it secret?" Eleanor busied herself arranging cups on a tray, her back to them. For a moment, Tom thought she might not answer, might ask them to leave now that the emergency had passed. Instead, she took a deep breath and turned to face them. "Let's sit down," she said, gesturing to the couch that had been pushed against one wall to make room for the artwork. "It's not a short story." As they settled into their seats, steam rising from their tea mugs, Eleanor looked around at her paintings with an expression that mingled pride and pain. "I wasn't always this secretive," she began. "Quite the opposite, actually. For 20 years I was known as Eleanor Winters. Perhaps you've heard the name?" Tom and Linda exchanged glances. The name did sound vaguely familiar, but neither could place it. "I was fairly well known in the art world," Eleanor continued. "Galleries in New York, Chicago, San Francisco. My work sold for amounts that still embarrass me to mention. Critics called me a keen observer of modern life and other fancy phrases." A small, sad smile played across her lips. "And I believed them. I believed my own press." She paused to sip her tea, her eyes distant with memory. "Success changes you. Or maybe it just reveals who you really are. I became difficult, demanding. I started caring more about my reputation than my work. More about prices than purpose." She shook her head. "And then, 5 years ago, everything fell apart." Outside, the wind howled, a fitting backdrop to Eleanor's story. "My husband, ex-husband now, was my manager. He handled the business side while I created. Perfect arrangement until I discovered he'd been falsifying my financial records for years. Tax fraud, missing payments to galleries, a mess that landed squarely on my shoulders when it all came to light." "That's terrible," Linda murmured. "It gets worse," Eleanor said with a hollow laugh. "While I was dealing with legal troubles, the critics decided I'd lost my touch. Said my new work was derivative and lacking authenticity. The galleries dropped me. Friends disappeared. And then," her voice caught slightly, "then came the fire." Tom leaned forward, drawn into her story despite himself. "A fire?" Eleanor nodded. "In my studio in Brooklyn. Electrical fault, they said. I lost everything. Decades of work, all my supplies, notebooks, sketches. Insurance covered the basics, but not She gestured helplessly, not what it meant to me. So you came here to start over, Linda said quietly. I came here to hide, Eleanor corrected her. To disappear. Eleanor Winters became Eleanor Matthews again, my maiden name. I found this little house online as far from the art world as I could get. I just wanted peace. No expectations, no critics, no pressure. But you kept painting, Tom observed, glancing around at the rescued artwork. A genuine smile touched Eleanor's face for the first time. I couldn't stop. It's who I am, what I do. But this time I decided to paint only for myself. No galleries, no sales, no public opinions, just pure creation. So that's why the shed, Linda realized. Your private studio. Eleanor nodded. The house was too small for a proper workspace. The shed was perfect after some renovations. I could work there without anyone watching, judging, expecting anything from me. But why not tell anyone? Tom asked. Why all the secrecy? People thought, well, all sorts of things. Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. I know what they thought. What they said. The crazy shed lady. She set down her mug with a decisive click. At first I was just being cautious. I didn't want anyone to connect me to my former life. But then when the whispers started, when people began making up stories instead of just asking me, she shrugged. I guess I got stubborn. Figured if they wanted to believe the worst without evidence, let them. Not everyone thought the worst, Tom said quietly. Eleanor's eyes met his.
No, not everyone. Linda had stood up and was walking slowly around the room, taking in each painting with growing wonder.
She stopped in front of the largest canvas, the one Tom had carried so carefully from the shed. This one, she said, pointing. It's the whole neighborhood. Every house, even ours. Eleanor joined her, looking up at the unfinished panorama. That's my current project. A complete view of Pine Grove centered on Maple Street. I've been working on it for months. Tom moved closer, amazed by the detail. Every house was rendered with perfect accuracy. The slightly crooked mailbox in front of the Hendersons' place. The wind chimes on the Garcia's porch. The flower boxes his own wife Linda had installed last spring. But more than the physical details, there was a warmth to the painting, a sense of life and community that made his throat tighten unexpectedly. You've captured all of us, he said softly, even though we weren't exactly welcoming. Eleanor touched the canvas gently, tracing the outline of one of the houses. That's the irony, I suppose. I came here to escape people, but ended up spending hours studying them, painting them, trying to understand the life of this place. She turned to face Tom and Linda. I may have kept to myself, but I've watched this community through all seasons now. I've seen kindnesses you probably don't even remember. Mrs. Chen bringing soup to the family with the newborn twins. Mr. Grayson shoveling everyone's driveways after the big snow last winter. Children leaving May Day flowers on porches. Linda's eyes had filled with tears. You saw the best in us even while we were thinking the worst of you. Eleanor smiled sadly. Not always. Some days the whispers got to me. Some days I painted out of spite, to prove to myself that I could still create beauty even when surrounded by judgment. She gestured toward a small, darker canvas in the corner. Those days produced different work. Tom stepped closer to look at the painting she'd indicated. It showed the same street but shadowed, the houses slightly distorted, windows like watchful eyes. It was beautiful in its way but unsettling. Pine Grove seen through the lens of loneliness and suspicion. A crack of thunder made them all jump, reminding them of the storm still raging outside. Linda checked her watch, surprised to find it was nearly midnight. We should let you get some rest, she said. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day dealing with the damage. Eleanor nodded, suddenly looking exhausted. The adrenaline of the rescue had worn off, leaving her pale and drained. Thank you, she said simply, for helping, for listening. As Tom and Linda prepared to dash back to their own home through the rain, Tom paused at the door. What will you do now? About your work, I mean. Eleanor looked around at the paintings crowding her small living room. I don't know, she admitted. The shed is gone, and the secret's out, at least with you two. People should see these, Linda said firmly. The real you, not the person they've imagined. Eleanor's expression was hard to read. Part fear, part resignation. Perhaps even a flicker of hope. Maybe, she said. Let's get through the storm first. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Pine Grove emerged to assess the damage. Downed trees, scattered branches, a few missing shingles and fence panels. The power was still out in most of the neighborhood, but emergency crews were already working on the lines. Tom was up early, checking their own property for damage. As he righted a toppled bird feeder, he noticed movement next door. Eleanor was standing in her backyard, surveying the remains of her shed. Even from a distance, he could see the slump of her shoulders, the weight of loss in her posture. Without thinking twice, he headed over, picking his way through puddles and debris. "Morning," he called softly as he approached, not wanting to startle her. Eleanor turned, her face tired but composed. "Good morning." They stood together, looking at the crushed structure. The massive oak tree had done thorough work. Little remained of the shed beyond splintered wood and twisted metal. "I'm sorry," Tom said. Eleanor shook her head. "It's just a building. The important things were saved." She turned to look at him directly. "Thanks to you and Linda." Before Tom could respond, they heard voices from the street. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, staring at the dramatic scene of the fallen tree. Among them, Tom recognized Diane, Frank, Patricia from the Homeowners Association, and several others who had been most vocal about the shed problem. "Looks like your privacy issue solved itself," Tom said wryly. To his surprise, Eleanor laughed, a genuine sound he'd never heard from her before. "I suppose it did." The neighbors were approaching now, curiosity drawing them closer. Patricia reached them first, her clipboard already in hand despite the early hour. "Ms. Matthews," she began in her official tone, "I'm sorry about your structure. We'll need to document the damage for association records and discuss removal plans for the tree." Eleanor nodded politely, but before she could respond, Tom found himself speaking up. "Actually, Patricia, before we get into paperwork, there's something you all should know about Eleanor and what was really happening in that shed." Eleanor shot him a startled look, but he pressed on. "It wasn't anything strange or suspicious. It was art. Beautiful art. Paintings of our town. Of all of us, actually." A murmur ran through the small crowd. Patricia blinked in surprise. "Art?" "I think," Tom said carefully, glancing at Eleanor for permission, "that once everyone's taken care of their storm cleanup, we might want to organize a little gathering to see what our neighbor has been creating all these months." Eleanor's expression shifted from alarm to uncertainty, to something that looked almost like acceptance. The neighbors were watching her now with undisguised curiosity, not the suspicious kind that had followed her for months, but something new. Something like interest. "Perhaps," Eleanor said quietly, meeting their gazes steadily for the first time. "Perhaps it is time." The week after the storm brought clear skies and cold temperatures to Pine Grove. The community slowly returned to normal as power was restored. Fallen trees were cleared and damaged roofs were patched. But for Eleanor Matthews, nothing would be quite the same again. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about what had really been happening in the mysterious shed. "She's an artist," people whispered, but this time with wonder rather than suspicion. "She's been painting our town." 3 days after the storm, Eleanor answered a knock at her door to find Tom Wilson standing on her porch with a small group of neighbors. Among them were several familiar faces. Patricia from the Homeowners Association, Frank and Doris from across the street, and a few others who had been most vocal about the shed problem. "Good morning, Eleanor," Tom said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "We've been talking and, well, we'd like to help." Eleanor looked at the group cautiously. "Help with what?" "Everything." Patricia stepped forward, her usual officiousness softened by what appeared to be genuine remorse. "The tree removal, for starters. Frank's brother has a landscaping business with the right equipment." Frank nodded. "No charge. It's the least we can do. And," Tom continued, "we thought maybe we could all pitch in to clear the debris. Maybe even—" He hesitated, then pushed ahead. "Maybe even rebuild your studio." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "Rebuild?" "If you want," Tom added quickly. "No pressure. But several of us have construction experience and the whole neighborhood is willing to contribute." Eleanor looked from face to face, searching for hidden motives or mockery. Instead, she found only awkward sincerity and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Why would you do this?" she asked finally. The neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was Doris who finally spoke up. "Because we were wrong," she said simply. We judged you without knowing you, made up stories instead of just asking questions. She gestured toward Eleanor's living room where the rescued paintings were still visible through the open door, and because anyone who creates something that beautiful deserves a place to work. Eleanor stood silent for a long moment. So many emotions crossed her face: suspicion, hope, hesitation, and finally a tentative acceptance. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say yes, Tom encouraged. Let your neighbors be neighbors. 2 weeks later, the transformation was remarkable. The fallen oak had been professionally removed, its usable wood salvaged for other projects. The crushed shed had been cleared away entirely, and in its place stood the frame of a new structure, larger, sturdier, with proper windows to let in natural light. Eleanor watched from her kitchen window as a team of volunteers worked on the roof. Weekend warriors in work clothes, they moved with the casual efficiency of people who knew their way around basic construction. Among them were faces she now knew by name, not just Tom, but also Joe, the high school shop teacher, Mike, who ran the hardware store in town, and even young Peter's father, who worked as a contractor. Women from the neighborhood had been equally involved, organizing material deliveries, providing food for the workers, and even helping with the actual construction. Patricia had surprised everyone with her knowledge of electrical wiring, gained from renovating her own home years earlier. As Eleanor prepared a tray of lemonade to take out to the workers, she marveled at how quickly everything had changed, from outcast to neighbor in the space of a few weeks, from whispers to friendly waves. It was dizzying and a little frightening. Linda Wilson appeared at the back door, knocking lightly on the frame. Need a hand with that? Eleanor smiled and handed her a pitcher. Thanks. As they walked toward the construction site together, Linda asked, Have you decided about the showing? Eleanor took a deep breath. The showing had been Patricia's idea, an informal exhibition of Eleanor's work, hosted in her home for the neighborhood to see. The suggestion had terrified her at first, memories of critical New York galleries still too fresh. But the idea had grown on her, taking root alongside the new studio. I think so, she said carefully. This Sunday, if that works for everyone. Just a simple open house, Linda beamed. I'll spread the word. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. The new studio was nearly complete, a testament to what determined neighbors could accomplish together. Inside Eleanor's house, Linda and a few other women helped rearrange furniture to create a proper viewing space for the artwork. It's like a real gallery, marveled young Beth, who had been enlisted to help put out refreshments. She was the same girl who, months earlier, had been warned not to walk past Eleanor's house alone. A very small, very informal one, Eleanor corrected her, but couldn't help smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. Is it true you were famous before? Beth asked, wide-eyed. Like really famous? Eleanor considered the question. For a little while, she said finally. In a very small world. Are you going to be famous again? The question caught Eleanor off guard. No, she said after a moment. I don't think so, and that's okay. Sunday afternoon arrived with perfect late autumn weather, crisp and clear, with sunshine streaming through the windows of Eleanor's small house. She had spent the morning in a state of nervous anticipation, rearranging paintings, then changing her mind and moving them back again. They're going to love it, Tom assured her when he and Linda arrived early to help with final preparations. Stop worrying. Old habits, Eleanor replied with a tight smile. After years of professional critiques, it was hard not to expect judgment. The first neighbors arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. Patricia, of course, clipboard replaced with a plate of homemade cookies. Others followed quickly, until Eleanor's living room and kitchen were filled with the people of Pine Grove, drinks and snacks in hand, moving slowly from painting to painting. Eleanor stood back, watching their reactions with her heart in her throat. She saw surprise, recognition, delight, heard murmurs of, "That's our house," and look at the detail on the town square. Children pointed excitedly at paintings that included them playing in the park or waiting at the bus stop. Older residents marveled at how she'd captured landmarks that had been part of their lives for decades. "These are extraordinary," Joe, the shop teacher, told her, studying a winter scene of the main street. "You've really seen us." "That's what art is supposed to do," Eleanor replied softly. "See things as they really are." The centerpiece of the exhibition was the large panorama of Maple Street, now completed. Eleanor had worked tirelessly over the past weeks to finish it, adding final touches that somehow made the neighborhood seem even more vibrant and interconnected than before. "It's like looking at ourselves through kinder eyes," Linda observed, standing beside Eleanor as they watched people gather around the large canvas. "Maybe that's what we all need sometimes," Eleanor replied. As the afternoon progressed, something unexpected began to happen. The event transformed from a simple art showing into something more like a community gathering. People who had lived next door to each other for years discovered new connections. Stories were shared, children played tag in the backyard, someone brought out a guitar, and through it all, Eleanor's paintings provided a backdrop, a mirror reflecting Pine Grove back to itself, only somehow warmer, more colorful, more alive with possibility. It was nearly dusk when the last guests began to leave. Tom and Linda stayed to help clean up, gathering plates and glasses as Eleanor walked Patricia to the door. "We should make this a regular thing," Patricia said decisively. "Not just your art, though that was wonderful, but the gathering. Maybe rotate houses. Build on the community spirit," Eleanor smiled. "That sounds nice." After the house was quiet again, Eleanor walked out to see the completed studio. The workers had finished it the day before, but she hadn't yet been inside. Tom flipped on the lights as they entered, revealing a space that took her breath away. It was larger than her old shed, with proper insulation, heating, and carefully planned lighting. Custom shelves held her rescued supplies. A new workbench gleamed along one wall, and in the center stood a beautiful easel, handmade, she realized, from the wood of the fallen oak tree. "Joe made it," Tom explained, seeing her run her fingers over the smooth surface. "Said the tree that destroyed your old studio should help build your new one. Poetic justice, he called it." Eleanor felt tears threatening. "I don't know how to thank everyone. Just keep painting," Linda said simply. "That's all anyone wants." Later that night, after Tom and Linda had gone home, Eleanor sat alone in her new studio. Through the windows, she could see lights shining in the houses along Maple Street. Homes she had painted so many times she knew every detail by heart. But now they weren't just houses to be observed from a distance. They were neighbors, people with names and stories and quirks and kindnesses she was just beginning to discover. Eleanor set up a fresh canvas on the new easel and picked up a brush. She wasn't sure yet what she would paint, perhaps another view of Pine Grove or maybe something entirely new. The possibilities stretched before her, as wide open as the path from her back door to her studio. No more hiding, no more secrets, no more being the strange woman in the shed. Just an artist working in the light, surrounded by a community that had learned to see her, really see her, just as she had always seen them.